Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Now, in fact, from a biological point of view, the majority of these mutations actually are not to the virus's advantage. In fact, some may well be lethal to the virus and stop it multiplying. But there's a small minority of these changes, of these mutations, which do change the characteristic or the personality of the virus and make it more problematic from a disease point of view. And there are three properties which we kind of worry about as a result of these mutations. The one is if it makes the virus more contagious, more transmissible, more infectious. That's the one problem. The second problem is if it escapes immunity. In other words, the immunity after being infected, or the immunity which the vaccine induces. That's another property which the virus can acquire as a result of a mutation. And the third property is obviously if the virus makes the disease more severe, makes the illness more severe. That's another. So these are the three characteristics which may result if a virus acquires these mutations to change its properties or its characteristics.
So what we know of Omicron as it stands now, it ticks the one box that you mentioned about it perhaps being more contagious, does it?
No, I think it's early days. I think we still need to kind of watch the space. It's early days. We certainly are now coming into the start of the fourth wave. Now, is this a more natural kind of part of the fourth wave, or is it a result of the virus being transmissible? That we need to see. Certainly, the fourth wave has come on us a lot earlier than we expected, and that may be due to the more contagiousness of the virus.
So that still then needs to be ascertained. Does it escape immunity? In other words, are the current vaccinations that we have able to deal with this Omicron?
Now, that's been examined in the laboratory. There are two laboratories in the country, the NICD and the University of KZN, which are looking at whether the antibodies, which people that have been vaccinated, whether those antibodies will neutralize the virus, what you call neutralizing antibodies. That's currently being examined in the laboratory. These tests are not overnight tests. We'll have to wait a couple of weeks before we get those results from the laboratory. But what we do observe is that there have been quite a substantial number of people that have been vaccinated that are getting infected. Fortunately, the great majority of those, what we call it breakthrough infections, have been mild. We haven't as yet encountered breakthrough infections which have been severe.
But Professor, should that even be a consideration? Because whether or not you are vaccinated, my understanding is that you could still contract the virus, whether it's beta or delta or Omicron. It's just that the symptoms that you exhibit will perhaps not be deadly as opposed to if you were not vaccinated.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. These vaccines are very, very good. They're excellent at preventing severe disease. And the 90% in preventing severe disease. When it comes to preventing infection or mild illness, these vaccines are not quite as effective as that. They are pretty good, but not quite as infectious. So they'll be, say, 60% protective against infection, and in the 90s in preventing severe disease. And that's really the main reason why we vaccinate at the moment is to stop people getting severe disease, as well as preventing infection.
Is it more severe, Omicron?
That we don't know as yet. So far, the indications, and I must stress so far, it is early days, but so far it looks as if it's not more severe. But we do need to watch the space. We do need to see how it pans out.
Talk to us about the number of mutations that we've seen from Omicron. That seems to have been an area of focus and concern for the World Health Organization as well as virologists, that there seem to be so many different mutations for it.
Yeah, this has been something which has really, I think, surprised us as virologists. This virus has got at least more than 30 mutations in the critical part of the virus. We call it the spike protein. That's the part that the virus uses to attach to cells and establish an infection. So it's got more than 30 mutations in that spike protein. Many of these mutations we know from other variants are associated with greater contagiousness and maybe also vaccine escape. We need to see how it's going to translate in reality, but those mutations are there. Also, the constellation of these mutations also give cause to worry. We've never seen this in other variants. This is actually a completely new variant. So we are on a learning curve, and we need to kind of see what the effect is in terms of disease, in terms of transmissibility, and in terms of vaccine escape. But you're absolutely right. These mutations are, in a way, unique. We haven't seen this in other variants, and this variant is unrelated to the other variants which preceded it.
What have been, Professor, the unique symptoms displayed by those who have the Omicron version of COVID-19?
We haven't seen actually different symptoms. It seems to be the same COVID due to Omicron as with other variants so far. But again, look, we're still in the early days. But so far, there doesn't seem to be any difference in the disease and the illness spectrum.
So if that is the case, Professor, why does there seem to be so much commotion around Omicron?
I think the worry, the concern is that there are a lot of question marks. As we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of mutations. There are a lot of the structure, the constellation of these mutations is also different. It's a different variant. So with anything new and anything that we're still learning about, there is some degree of concern. We need to kind of reassure ourselves that this is not going to be a more sinister, a more dangerous, a more worrisome variant. It's still the early days. We haven't got a precedent to look back on and say, this is how it's going to behave. That's why there is a concern, because it's new, it's novel, it's unique.